Hey, Derek.
Yeah, I was just about to say something to you.
Okay.
You seen that old message I sent last week?
We're live. We're live on YouTube, y'all.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So maybe chat on the group chat.
Yeah. Well, you know now, so.
I think we need to play it over with sound. I think we need to play it over with sound.
Anytime you find the government involved in a conspiracy to violate the citizenship or the civil rights of a people, then you are wasting your time going to that government expecting redress. Instead, you have to take that government to the world court and accuse it of genocide and all of the other crimes that it is guilty of. So those of us who cannot go in economic and social philosophy and black nationalism have become involved in the civil rights struggle. We have injected ourselves into the civil rights struggle, and they intend to expand it from the level of civil rights to the level of human rights. As long as you're fighting on the level of civil rights, you're under Uncle Sam's jurisdiction. You're going to his court expecting him to correct the problem. He created the problem. He's the criminal. For the criminal, you take your criminal. That Uncle Sam is guilty of violating the human rights. 22 million Afro and still has the audacity or the nerve to stand up and represent himself as the leader of the free world. Not only is he a crook, he's a hypocrite. In front of other people. Uncle Sam, with the blood of your mothers and fathers on his hands, with the blood sticking down his jaws like a bloody jawed wolf, and still got the nerve to point his finger at other countries. You can't even get civil rights legislation. And this man has got the nerve to stand up and talk about South Africa, or talk about Nazi Germany, or talk about Portugal. No more days like those. So I say in my conclusion, the only way we're going to solve it, we got to unite in unity and harmony. And black nationalism is the key. How are we going to overcome the tendency to be at each other's throats that always exists in our neighborhood? And the reason this tendency exists, the strategy of the white man has always been divide and conquer. He keeps us divided in order to conquer us. He tells you I'm for separation and you for integration and keep us fighting with each other. No, I'm not for separation and you're not for integration. What you and I are for is freedom.
All right, all right. Do we have our panelists on board yet, guys? Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you. My name is Robert Cozy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Robert. Hey, that the message was for my comrades, though.
Okay.
Hi, Derek.
Hey, but look who we got in from dang, Pastor, I can't even think of the city where you at now.
Benton Harbor.
Benton Harbor, there we go.
Yeah, Benton Harbor in the house. Good to see you, my brother.
Good to see you too, Pastor.
Hey, I said good to be seen rather than viewed anyway.
Yes, sir.
Panelists are on board.
Thanks, Yvonne. Great. All right. Set this down here. All right. Well, I guess we're ready to start this, get this show on the road, huh? All right. So welcome, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. We got some good tech people, so.
Coming across good.
All
Yep.
right,
I can hear.
I can hear you.
all right,
I,
good.
I can hear you. This is Walter Naw.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. This is a very important discussion. So my name is Derek Grigsby. I'm an activist organizer with the Moratorium Now Coalition to stop foreclosures, evictions, and utility shutoffs. We don't use our full name a lot, and I think we need to let everybody know just exactly where we stand. But this is a great day because it's Malcolm X. It's a day we don't celebrate, we honor. We honor Malcolm X because he did the ultimate sacrifice for us. And even though he was murdered on this day, it's a day for us to give him praise. No greater love. This very important person once said, no greater love does a person have that they will lay down their life for their fellow man. And I'm not reading that, I remember that. There's no greater love. He sacrificed for us. So thank you, Malcolm. All right. So, like I said, on behalf of Moratorium Now Coalition, we thank you guys for hanging out and be a part of this discussion. Should be lively, should be very informative. That's what we want. We want to inform. This is a very sensitive and important subject that we all should be aware of and how to deal with it, basically. And that discussion or a topic is the critical race theory. If you haven't heard of it, check it out. And you're going to learn about it tonight. When I was researching this subject, I went to Wikipedia to see what it says about critical race theory. And it had this very long ass academic definition that we just don't have a lot of time for. So I shortened it. I simplified it just for us. Critical race theory. The core idea is that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies. That's all it's about. And we have people who want to, using every means possible to not let this be taught. Also, here. I have a co-host here, Abayomi Ezekwe. But before I introduce Abayomi, I'm looking for this here. One of the attacks on critical race theory, I want to say this before we introduce our panelists and my co-moderator, is that one of the major attacks that we see on critical race theory is that since January 2021, 37 states have introduced bills or taken steps that would restrict teaching CRT, critical race theory, or limit how others teach it. So that definition I just gave you, it sounds kind of helpful, didn't it? But we have people who are trying their best not to let this information or this education be taught. So they are restricting it in 37 states, and then They are limiting teachers or what teachers can discuss about racism and sexism. 14 states have imposed these bans and restrictions either through legislation or other avenues, like executive action and the authority of state education commissions. So this is how they're trying to limit our access to this, this great information, this great education. So right now, let me see, am I to introduce anyone yet? Let me introduce my co-moderator, Abayomi Ezekiel. Abayomi, you could take it for a minute. Let me see what are we doing here.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Derek, for those introductory remarks. I want to also thank our panelists who will be coming to us in a few minutes. We have Sammy Lewis, we have Nancy Parker, we have Mark Fancher, and we also have Lloyd Simpson. All activists, all very much engaged in the struggle for liberation and social justice in Detroit and indeed around the country and the world. I just wanted to make a few introductory remarks in regard to this topic tonight. Now, examining this topic is important for African American History Month this year, 2022, since the issue has generated controversy, which is being exploited politically by the right wing in the United States. Moreover, we deliberately selected this date, which is the 57th anniversary of the martyrdom of Malcolm X, also known as Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. He lived between 1925 and 1965. Now, since the life of this strategic thinker, organizer, and public spokesman for the African people worldwide represents an excellent example of self-education and transformation. Now, Malcolm X, of course, wrote an autobiography that was published posthumously. He was born in Omaha, Nebraska. His parents were staunch members of the Garveyite Universal Negro Improvement Associations, the African Communities League, Earl and Louise Little. They had met at a UNIA convention in 1919 that was held in Montreal, Quebec. Louise Little, Malcolm X's mother, was born in the Caribbean island nation of Grenada. She wrote and published articles for the Negro World newspaper, which was the journal of the UNIA. And you can learn more about Malcolm X's life in his own autobiography. Malcolm X, of course, got involved in street life during his teenage years. He eventually was caught up in the criminal justice system. And in 1946, he was sentenced to prison in the state of Massachusetts. While in prison, he educated himself even more. His father had been killed, possibly by the white racists up near Lansing, Michigan. Malcolm, of course, suffered many indignities and injustices as a youth in the state of Michigan. He eventually left after his family was broken up in the aftermath of his father's death and moved to Boston to live with an older sister, Ella Collins. While in prison, he went through another process of transformation, reading extensively, being involved in debating clubs, and eventually accepting Islam and joining the Nation of Islam. He was paroled in 1952. He became initially an assistant minister here in the city of Detroit, and later a minister in New York and several other cities during the 1950s and early 1960s. We say all this only to point out that Malcolm X is part of a broad sector of African-American writers and organizers who are being attacked by right-wing forces in the United States. Undoubtedly, the speeches and writings of Malcolm X are being banned by school boards and library commissions under the control of conservative and right-wing political forces. These works by Malcolm X are joining other African-American hidden figures, such as Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, Ann Petrie, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who there's even a federal holiday named after him in the United States, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Dr. W.B. Du Bois, Dr. Huey P. Newton, Dr. Angela Davis, George Jackson, among many others, whose writings and recordings and images are being banned by many forces within the American school system. So I just wanted to make those introductory remarks. And this, of course, will be further elaborated on during the course of this webinar tonight. I want to turn it back over to Derek to begin to introduce our panelists.
All right, thank you, Abayomi. Let me adjust this thing here. All right, thanks for that very deep description of what we're doing here and what this is all about, Abayomi. Okay, our first two, well, the two panelists I'm going to introduce. The first is Sammy Lewis. Sammy is a self-raised scholar, an intellectual, queer, Black feminist, intersectional revolutionary, and skillful organizer with a background in social justice, community gardening, birth work, childcare, and nutrition. Thanks, Sammy, for hanging out with us tonight. The other panelist I'm introducing is Lloyd Simpson. Lloyd is an organizer with Detroit Will Breathe, a militant organization that opposes police brutality and systemic racism. Now, are we going to have our panelists give their opening remarks before you introduce the other two? Okay, so Sammy or Lloyd, Sammy, since I introduced you first, you can go if you would like to say something about what we're going to be doing, just introductory remark.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Derek, for that introduction and for having me here today to honor both Malcolm X and Black History Month. I want to briefly start off with what critical race theory is not. I do personally think that CRT is a necessary method of teaching, but I don't think that it's right to say that CRT is educational equity. While it does help us understand the ways in which racism functions in an American society, it doesn't supply the tools and resources needed for true equity. In order to have educational equity, we have to be able to recognize and address the discrimination against people for their race, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, level of income, and so on. CRT helps us systematically understand why we lack equity, but it doesn't necessarily do anything more than educate us. However, that is not to say that education isn't power. To promote educational equity, we must increase accessibility to proper resources and remove any obstacles and barriers. So now moving on to what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is an academic understanding of the ways racism in America exists and how it's rooted in policy, regulation, bills, laws, and education. Critical race theory is a framework that is being shut down in the educational system because nothing's more powerful than an educated Negro who understands their oppression, who and where it comes from, and the form it exists in. It does not just affirm the backgrounds of people of color, but it helps to recognize and critique the constant injustices and inequalities against us. The concept helps to grasp the ways discrimination runs deep in this country. The oppressor will work hard to prove that CRT is just a way to divide us, when in fact, we are already divided. For me, to know CRT is to know my enemies, my oppressors, and the ways I have been and continue to be oppressed, as it showcases the ways racism is part of everyday life systemically and not just individually. The thing about critical race theory is that it covers racism in aspects that some may not see. Those who do not intend to be racist may still be fueling the fire of racism, and it's important to utilize CRT to educate folks how to truly be anti-racist in a system that perpetuates discrimination and violence onto people of color, especially Black people. CRT is a way to examine the system as a whole. Anything that is legally blocking CRT is not only an attack on people of color, but is an obstruction of freedom of speech. Critical race theory demonstrates the ways that racism is systemic, and censorship against the teaching of this theory is quite literally exposing systemic racism, as these bans prevent the right to the whole truth. The educational system perpetuates racism, and the idea that CRT cannot be taught due to the fact that white students might feel guilty is absolutely ridiculous. I can tell you what, learning about Christopher Columbus and other colonizers made me feel uncomfortable in school, so why can't white students feel uncomfortable too? Growth isn't comfortable. The bills against critical race theory suppresses free thinking and only continues to whitewash education and society, which is why we must fight back against such laws. So in summary, CRT may not be educational equity, but it is a step in the right direction, as education is a tool we can use to fight the system. Critical race theory acknowledges systemic racism for what it truly is and provides a thorough understanding of the inequalities and injustices against people of color in a violent system that is working exactly the way it is intended. CRT is a threat to those who benefit from oppression, and it is important to fight the laws against the teaching of this concept. We have the right to the truth, and CRT educates on just that. I want to leave you all with a quote from Malcolm X. Education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sammy. Before Lloyd comes on, there's a quote that I had, I watched a documentary of, there used to be a town where Central Park is in New York. There used to be a Black town there. And one of the descendants, you know, I guess they're revealing that history now. You know, that's critical race theory right there, you know, teaching it all, the real Black history of this country. But she had said, she made a quote as it was going off. She said, "Nothing covered will ever be healed." And I believe that's what critical race theory, it embodies that, you know, simple. Go ahead, Lloyd. I got to get my talk on, man.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I think it was very appropriate to begin with that speech from Malcolm X, because he starts off with an indictment of the US law system in regards to Black Americans as fundamentally incapable of providing justice before the law. And so what critical race theory is a tradition, a legal tradition that began in the 80s of examining US law in that context, in the context of a racialized society specifically. And so many would say that that began with Derek Bell, a legal scholar who began in the 1970s, ultimately ends up at Harvard Law. But critical race theory also represents, it has different strains. So, you know, that overlap, and there's definitely some significant divergence. And so I think it's important to understand that why we're having this conversation here today is because there's certainly an attack on the teaching of the true nature of this society. And that's what we're talking about here. And critical race theory is holding the bag for that. But really what is going on is the right is saying we're not going to teach the real history of the United States. And the liberals are saying we're going to give you this watered down version of CRT that's acceptable to the ruling class and acceptable to the powers that be. And so I think that's important to state. And so I think part of our task is certainly we want to understand what critical race theory is and what it isn't. I think that's important for everyone, but we don't want to lose sight of the, get too caught up in trying to unpack critical race theory as something that is just in and itself going to be a tool of liberation. It's a study of the law in the context of race. And so I think that that's important to mention. And it's also in terms of Derek Bell and many scholars and people who have operationalized critical race theory as a tool to understand the law, it's materially based. So the US law was constructed in such a way to deny material equality to Black Americans in this country. And that all of, when we talk about property, when we talk about citizenship, all of that has been constructed against the personhood of Black people in US law. And that's really what critical race theory is about. And as I said, there's some divergence in terms of, what particular scholars wrote and how they thought about critical race theory. I mean, even in its inception in the 80s, there was no consensus. There was not an absolute consensus amongst those scholars exactly what that was. And it didn't need to be. But what the right is doing now has everything to do with what it's been doing since the inception of this country, is to obfuscate, to hide the true nature of US society. And so CRT is holding the bag, but before that, it was something else. And they are trying to assert their right, or their right. And I mean, if you look at the US Constitution and the legal founding of this country, it was designed to protect landowning white males. And so people have fought to change that, but fundamentally that's what the United States is about. And so I think that CRT is valuable. I do think that we cannot be too wrapped up in this idea that we can reform a legal system that was constructed against the citizenship of Black people. But it's certainly important, and I'm glad to be here today to discuss how that can be useful in the struggle for liberation.
All right, thank you, Lloyd. Abayomi?
Okay, thank you, both of you, for those very well thought out comments. Right now, I want to introduce our other two panelists, and both of them are both legal practitioners, along with being community organizers. First, we want to bring on Nancy A. Parker, who is currently the interim managing attorney of the Detroit Justice Center's Legal Services and Advocacy Practice, Movement Lawyering Division, where she focuses on providing legal support to movement organizations in the city and surrounding communities. Nancy also engages in direct representation of clients in traffic court, family court, and assists as well in federal litigation. Nancy received her bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan, where she majored in sociology and minored in African and African-American studies. She also earned her Juris Doctorate from Washington University, which is, of course, in the city of St. Louis, where she was first introduced to critical race theory. Nancy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, brother. So I'd like to just say good evening and thank you for the over 100 people that are gathered tonight This is a lovely turnout. So what is critical race theory? I'm gonna explain it to folks in the most basic, non-legally way so people can understand that we're not talking about the boogeyman here. Critical race theory is simply a legal theory. It is a framework. It is literally a framework. It's as if you were to put on your glasses and you put on your CRT glasses so you can see things through this framework. It is not facts, it's not the boogeyman, it's not anything crazy like these right-wing nuts want you to believe. It is literally a framework to analyze the country in which we live in. We live in a country where Africans were brought here enslaved and were not seen as full citizens. We have never yet recovered. We still live a second-class citizenship life. Critical race theory uses a framework to analyze the situation which we find ourselves in this country. So when we think about racism, if we don't have this great body of legal scholarship that, as Lloyd mentioned, we get from the great Derek Bell, carried on by Kimberly Crenshaw and the host of other Black scholars who really asked these questions, formulated it, and have presented it. And mind you, this has existed for over 40 years. Keep that in mind. This body of work has existed for decades. Think to yourself, why is it now such a big cause for concern? That it's always, who is the messenger that's bringing you this information? Always question that. But these scholars that in the 70s and 80s put this together, it was a way to analyze what we were left with in this country after the civil rights movement, right? So if everything was all gravy, we won't be in this fight. We would have gotten our rights and we would be on our way and everything would be equal. But we know when you start from a position of disadvantage, you can't just say, Black people, you are now free, and therefore you're on an equal playing field. That literally is nonsensical in any shape or form, just analyzing the fact that Black folks were enslaved. We didn't have land. We didn't have jobs. We didn't have all these things that the white folks already had and were subjugating us so that they could keep. So now you free us. And if even right at the point of emancipation, when folks were shouting for reparations and make Black folks equal citizens, at that point in time in history, there was already a blowback that no, right after declaring you free citizens, we can't give you reparations because that would be reverse discrimination. That's in essence what happened. We can't give you money, we can't give you land because that would hurt the white landowners and the white Southerners and all the white people. Therefore, if we could not, and I'll try not to be as cynical as I am in real life, just to give folks some hope, but if at the time we were released from bondage, it was too much for white people. And in fact, the only people who received reparations were slave owners. Then we have Reconstruction era, where we were doing as well as we can be. That was driven back. Then you fast forward, we had Obama. Okay, everyone said, oh, we're in a post-racial America. What did we see after Obama? We see Trump. The only way you have a Trump is because of Obama. It's because of the audacity of a Black man to sit in the White House. And so we look at what's happening now. What did we just come off in the summer of 2020? What folks were calling a racial reckoning, where people were demanding racial justice after the brutal killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And so we see the white folks go back to their old tricks and say, okay, there's been a modicum of progress, a modicum of giving Black people a semblance of true citizenship. We now have to dial this back. And so that's where we see now this boogeyman of critical race theory. We're going to give you a crazy term that you've probably never heard of unless you went to either law school or any type of advanced degree stage. critical race theory is not taught in K-8. It is not taught in high school. I am a lawyer. The first time I was introduced to this scholarship was when I went to law school. It is literally a legal framework that will never be taught to children. It's complex. This is not something you feed children. What the right wing, what they're trying to do is confuse you, throw out a term that you don't know and say, this is what is going to hurt our children. In fact, what they're doing is an intentional misinformation, disinformation campaign. These legislators know good well exactly what Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw came up with when they said critical race theory. What they have now done is use it as a catch-all to say, we don't want you to teach history. We don't want our students to learn history. And in all these conversations, the white is silent. The white is silent. They don't want white children to learn about history. They don't want white children's feelings to be hurt. It is not all children, because we know that's not the case. Black folks have been yearning, people of color, those who have been hip to what's going on in this country, have been yearning for this knowledge. It is the powers that be that understands that they maintain power, they stay where they are when they're able to scare the masses, pit them against one another, right? Pit poor white people against Black people. Anytime there's any semblance of a coming together, which we briefly saw again when Obama was elected and this summer, they now scramble and say, well, we need to dial this back. We need to take things away. We can't let this get out of hand, again, because their priority is maintaining white supremacy and protecting their white power. So what critical race theory does is, again, it just is a framework that looks at the situation in this country. Take the wealth gap between Black folks and white folks. Why is it so stark? Why is it so just, these numbers make no sense. Without a framework that has been created by these legal scholars, one could look at it and say, well, this must mean that Black people are lazy. They don't like to work. They don't value home ownership. They don't value generational wealth. And therefore, that explains the current situation that we find Black folks in today. We all know that is not correct. If you're here tonight, I hope you know that's not correct. What critical race theory then does is take that same situation we're looking at and says, okay, well, let's look at the history of this country. We know the federal government itself played a hand in creating these segregated neighborhoods. The Federal Housing Authority, they were instrumental in segregating folks, putting not Black folks not being able to get loans, white folks moving out to the suburbs. We're gonna build you an infrastructure. We're gonna build you transit to allow you to get to your jobs. You poor Black people in these ghettos that we have created, we're gonna do nothing for you. This is the wealth gap that we see is based on systemic inequality, not because of any Black malfeasance, but because of what this country has done. And so the same thing can be said about police brutality in this country. If you take it from an individual point, you will say Eric Garner should not have been selling loose cigarettes. George Floyd should not have allegedly had a counterfeit $20 bill. Those are red herrings. You're focusing on the wrong thing, because when you do that individualized analysis, you're ignoring history of oppression, history of systemic racism that has caused these folks to be in the precarious situations that they are. And moreover, you're ignoring the racist institution of policing that we have in this country. And so folks can say, well, victory would be Derek Chauvin being sent to prison for decades, right? Because he murdered a man. Looking at it through this framework, you can see that Derek Chauvin, yes, it was his knee for almost 10 minutes that killed George Floyd, but it's the institution of policing. It is racist at its core, that is anti-Black, that causes and fuels and can have a whole system of police feel that that was perfectly okay for a police officer to do. And so I'm glad everyone is here today. I'm glad that folks who are not or may not be in the advanced degree curriculum are actually learning what critical race theory is so that they can see the world through the lens which we need to actually analyze it so that we can break it down, as opposed to looking at it from an individual standpoint. And in closing, I would say Kimberly Crenshaw has a great analogy where she says, basically, think about asbestos. Back in the day, they built buildings, schools, everything. Asbestos was everywhere. And then at some point in time, they realized, oh, shoot, this is not good for us. It's killing us. We need to address this problem. We need to locate the asbestos. We need to figure out the gear we need, the training folks need so that they can remove it. And we need to build back these buildings. That is in essence what race is in this country. It's a racist construct that was built up, that is ingrained in a lot of our institutions and structures. It makes no sense to say the way we deal with this issue is to ignore it, which is what the right wing wants you to do. They don't want you to talk about race. They don't want you to talk about the history. They don't want you to talk about anything. If you ignore race, it will go away. That's why folks advocate for color blindness. Stop bringing it up. But we have to bring it up because we have to ameliorate the situation that we're in. We have to remove the asbestos. We have to treat the asbestos. We have to attack the racist institutions. We have to tear them down, and we have to build up what's better for an actual just and equal society. So I hope that that has been as clear as I can make it without being overly complicated. But again, critical race theory is a legal framework. It is not the boogeyman. It is not people trying to tell you your white kids are bad. It is literally a way to analyze the society. And what the right wing is trying to do, which we do need to be very cognizant of, is stop the information, the history of a country from getting to the people. And I have to end with a quote from Brother Malcolm, who was one of my idols and just my guiding light in everything that I do, one of the most amazing human rights activists that we were blessed with. But in relation to what we're seeing, especially with the media, Brother Malcolm told us this. He said, if you are not careful, the newspaper will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. Let me say that to you again. The newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. So when you see these school board meetings where folks are rallying and being hysterical and saying they don't want this taught because of da-da-da-da-da-da, what are they talking about? It's complete, utter nonsense. It's a manufactured hysteria, misinformation, disinformation. It is not the facts. Read up on the truth, read up on the facts, read up on your history so that we can join together, identify the enemy, and identify what we need to take down. So that's what I have to say. I apologize. I'm sure I said I was going to be brief, and I probably said I was done 5 times, but I'm a lawyer and that's what I do. So I kept talking. Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's attendance today.
Well, thank you so much, Sister Nancy. And I really appreciated the quote by Malcolm X, paraphrasing that the media can make you hate the victim and love the criminal. And that's why critical thinking is so important, particularly during this time period. Our next panelist is Attorney Mark P. Fancher. He is the staff attorney for the Racial Justice Project of the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan. Through his work, he addresses racially disproportionate rates of incarceration, racial discrimination against public school students of color, racial profiling, attacks on the democratic rights of communities of color, and abusive police practices. Fancher was formerly the senior staff attorney for the Sugar Loss Center for Economic and Social Justice, where he specialized in workers' rights. He has also served on the staff of the State Bar of Michigan. He was a visiting assistant clinical professor at the University of Michigan Law School. He also has been in private practice where he specialized in employment discrimination and community economic development. Fancher has played a leadership role in the National Conference of Black Lawyers for numerous years. He has lectured across the country and written extensively on issues involving U.S. military presence in Africa, political repression in the United States, and the land and resources rights of traditional and indigenous communities. Brother Mark, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate it so much. And I also want to thank my brother and my sisters for having given everyone a very excellent overview of what critical race theory is and what critical race theory is not. From my perspective, the value of this method of analysis is that it looks beyond just the superficial, and it's able to identify the nuances of law. It's able to identify the nuances of policy and demonstrate the ways in which even those people who have the best of intentions, people who have no plans to engage in discrimination or racial harassment or any type of racial hostility at all, just by virtue of functioning within the United States of America, still bring about racialized outcomes. One of the aspects that has been the focus of critical race theory study concerns the First Amendment. You know, if I stand out in front of a major office building in a metropolitan area, and I'm brandishing a rifle, and I start screaming at the top of my lungs that I'm going to kill all white people, that I'm going to begin a racial purge. I am going to organize my brothers and my sisters to rise up and to strike against racism by killing every white person I can find. Within moments, I will be in custody and I will either be under the prison or I will be dead. Count on it. But if you take a white person who is brandishing an AR-15 and they stand in the state legislature and they start talking about how they're going to get violent with anybody who decides to in any way infringe on their rights to get their guns or to in any way affect their lives in a way that they perceive as negative, if police begin to make even a move toward them, then all of a sudden the First Amendment becomes their protector. We can't do anything to these people. They have First Amendment rights. They have free speech rights. And so critical race theory understands this difference in the application of First Amendment. It understands it not only from the perspective of those who are trying to exercise the First Amendment, but it also recognizes the impact on certain people of the exercise of the First Amendment by people who have the right and the ability to exercise it. So when I see that person, that white person with the AR-15 standing in the legislature, whether that person ever comes around and tries to confront me or tries to approach me or tries to shoot me, whether he does or whether he doesn't, I understand the power that that individual has. I understand that the power of the state will back the individual up if he tries to do anything against me. I understand that he has a realistic possibility of mobilizing lots of other white people to come and get me simply because of who I am. And so just knowing that causes psychic harm to me. Even without them doing anything to me, it causes me psychic harm because of the fear that I'm experiencing, because of the concern that I'm experiencing. If you flip the script and you look at me, if I try and brandish a rifle or an AR-15, any place in a public place, and a white person sees me engaging in a rant against white people, they just shake their heads and laugh because they know that I'm not going to be able to put any of my plans into action. They're confident that the state will come down on me like a ton of bricks. So critical race theory is the analysis that's used to look at these types of situations. Look at the subtleties and the nuances of how the law applies differently to people, even though those who are proponents of the law say that it's an even playing field, that the law is applied without any type of favoritism or without partisanship whatsoever. We understand from our sister, our National Conference of Black Lawyers colleague, Cheryl Harris, a great professor, who engaged in a study to demonstrate that whiteness, the mere fact that you're white, has economic value. You know, she wrote an incisive piece on whiteness as property. So we see manifestations of this in many different ways. But the thing that I think that's most important is that we not go after the red herring. You know, we can become bound up and caught up in trying to address these issues concerning critical race theory in schools and become distracted from what we really need to be about. All that this is the manifestation of white people losing their minds, losing their ever-loving minds. It's very much a part of what we saw on January 6th, because from the very beginning, this country has told white people that no matter what happens in this country, no matter what happens, you will never find yourself in the lowest rung of the caste system. If you have any doubts about it, look at what we say in the Dred Scott versus Sanford opinion, where we say that Black people have no expectation of any type of rights in this country. If you're white, you're gonna have rights. If you're Black, don't even worry about it. Don't even think about it, because you're not gonna get any. This is a promise that's been made to white people, no matter what their economic status, if they have means or if they don't. And so for those white people who are in the lowest socioeconomic category, who don't have anything in the way of material possessions, who don't have anything in the way of status, who don't have anything in the way of position, the one thing that they've always been able to count on is, because I'm white, I will always be above somebody else. And so when you come to the Reconstruction period after the abolition of enslavement, and all of a sudden, African people are making great progress politically. African people's literacy rates are jumping. African people are establishing enterprises. African people's position and status is outpacing that of white workers. White workers lost their ever-loving minds, and they struck back. And one of the ways that they struck back was by establishing the Ku Klux Klan, which was engaged in a process of what they called redemption, redeeming the South for white people. And so when we fast forward to the current day, and white people look around and they see that all of a sudden their economic condition is not as good as it once was. It's not as good as their fathers was. It's not as good as their grandfathers was. The plant where granddad and dad worked is no longer there. And so that even if dad got a chance to work there, his son is not going to have that opportunity. When they see that they're struggling because of healthcare and their inability to afford it, and all of these things are happening to them, unbeknownst to them because of corporate decisions that are being made, then they begin to look for answers. And so they find demagogues, political demagogues. You know, the village idiot is elected to the presidency of the United States, and he tells them all kinds of lies. And all these other idiots who follow along behind him tell the same kinds of lies, and they say, don't look at the corporate boardrooms for what's happening to you. Look at these brown people who are coming across the border. They're threatening you because they're going to outpace you in terms of demographic projections. You're going to become a minority. Look at these Black people who are taking your jobs and taking your positions in schools because of affirmative action. They're the ones that are responsible for your problems. And so in order to keep people fired up, in order to keep people energized and fighting for things that have nothing to do with their condition, they tell them lies. And when they run out of lies to tell them, they create more lies to tell them. They'll look at the schools and say, well, we're going to go to the schools and tell the teachers not to teach your kids things that they're lying about in terms of who you are as a victim. If you listen to what the teachers were telling the kids about history when they were telling it accurately, you would think that because you're white and you had some certain privilege that was provided to you in law, that you're not the victim, that those who were people of color who were oppressed were the victims. That's not consistent with the narrative that we're giving you, which is that you as white workers are the victims. and that the people of color are the victimizers. And so in order to ensure that our propaganda and our lies hold sway, we've got to crush this teaching of accurate history in the schools. And if we say that we're trying to stop them from teaching history, nobody's going to support that because people want their kids to get an education. So we have to come up with a scary sounding name, critical race theory. There are probably precious few schools, particularly elementary schools, where critical race theory has ever been mentioned. But because it sounds scary, because it sounds threatening, then people who just respond to stimuli jump when they hear scary words. They jump when the demagogues start teaching them all of these lies, and they say, we've got to crush critical race theory. So we can't be caught up in that. You know, our focus has to be on the things that we're focused on, which is liberation. It must be focused on gaining power. It must be focused on all the things that we've been looking for as the prize that we have to achieve if we want to live the kinds of lives that our people have been struggling to live since they were first kidnapped and brought over here to the Western Hemisphere. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for those enlightening observations. And I think we have, of course, targeted the fact that the whole controversy generated by what is labeled as critical race theory is a tool of the racist system, not only to distract us, but also to perpetuate our oppression. And of course, this webinar seeks to lend clarity to this debate surrounding CRT and its implications for the challenges of facing African Americans and people of African descent globally. Now, these attacks against CRT and any form of anti-racist education is accompanying the restrictions that are being placed on the right to vote in at least 19 states in the US. The attacks on education and public libraries are taking place alongside the escalation of police repression, mass incarceration, superclass exploitation, and also imperialist war. I want to turn it back over to my co-host, Derek, and I believe he had a few questions to start off our discussion, and then we will open up for questions and comments from the audience in general. Derek?
Thanks, Abiyomi. Yeah, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this discussion is I wanted the people who are on this call, I want you guys to have input because, you know, a lot of times we sit around on these Zoom meetings and we listen to somebody talk for 2 hours and we have an opinion that could be vital to the discussion. And so I do want you guys to be involved in this. Some of the questions are going to be directed to our panelists. And but if you guys have questions or comments, short comments, but good, decent questions, we want to hear them. So I'm going to start the question off because that was great from our panelists. You know, you guys have described it, you know, what it is in very simple forms, but they are attacking us with it. So how do we oppose this? Because, you know, the targets is not blacks, really. The targets are whites. They don't want whites, just like Mark said, to see who the real enemy is. And it ain't us, it's them. And so how do we oppose this? And this is to the panelists. Either one of you guys can answer that, or a few of you can. How do we, you know, how do we oppose this? How do we attack this? We got to go on the attack because we can't just sit back and take it and let things, you know, get twisted back into the past. Anybody?
I'll jump into a quick note is, as much as we see like the crazy school board meetings and parents yelling and all this and that. We need our parents. We need parents who want their children to be taught history and facts. We need these parents to also show up at your local school board meetings and voice your dissatisfaction with any censorship. We need there to be a vocal majority that also comes out in support of education, of history, of the true form of what happened in this country. Because it is, as much as this is all a distraction, the effects will still be very much real in terms of we will have public schools where they won't know who Malcolm X was or Dr. King. They will know Dr. King got arrested and was in jail. They will know the Rosa Parks and that's just the superficial of what we already were getting. So they're definitely not getting the Bayard Rustin and everyone else, right? So we need to make sure that folks are showing up and showing out and voicing their opinion as well. And as the legislature goes, because this is really, really going towards fascist regime where, Mark talked about First Amendment rights. What we're seeing is folks who want to hold on to their First Amendment rights are then telling other people, we're going to silence speech. We're going to dictate what books you can read. They're literally walking into libraries and pulling books off the bookshelf. Like we're living almost in a dystopian society right now. It's really wild what they're getting away with. So, write your legislatures, speak up at school board meetings, really come out in favor of your children being taught true history.
I just wanted to suggest that, one of the great failings, and I don't ever shy away from saying it's a failing of the white left, is that it never really focused on talking to these white workers and explaining to them that people of color are not the enemy. And it left all of these people vulnerable to all of the misstatements and the lies of the demagogues. And I think we're at another one of those points when I think a lot of those white workers are lost. They're completely crazy. But I think that there is an opportunity to talk to teachers. Certainly it's good to oppose the legislation and all of that, but we've got a tradition, in terms of movement in this country where we don't count on those in power to do the things that are going to benefit the people who really need the benefits. And I think that we need to organize teachers. We need to talk to teachers and tell them to get their courage up, and that they need to be prepared to teach whatever it is that their conscience dictates that they teach with respect to accurate history, and that this becomes a new opportunity for civil disobedience. The rest of us who are not teachers need to have their back. We need to be there when they're disciplined for violating whatever school rules or legislation that may exist. But this is one of those critical moments when it creates an opportunity for us to make a very dramatic point about what's actually happening. If teachers continue to teach, notwithstanding laws and rules, and they suffer for it, that will raise the contradictions to the surface, and the history that they were trying to suppress becomes even more the focus of everybody who's curious at this point about what these people are being punished for.
So piggybacking on both Nancy and Mark, I think that, bringing in parents and teachers is incredibly important. But I also think that there are plenty of high school students that know that they're not being taught properly, and we should not be undermining them. They also have the power to create change and to promote the education that they want to see. So I think it's also important that we include them in that. I think it's also important that we meet people where they are at, and we meet them with their values, and we're transparent and open to discussion and questions around this analysis. So that's just my thoughts on that.
So I agree with most of that. I would just add that thinking about the context of critical race theory, Derek Bell described it as the interest convergence of Blacks and whites. And when that's opportune, these reforms will come about. But then you have the period of what he called racial sacrifice, which is basically retrenchment. And I think that we're in a period following 2020, we're in a period like that now. So a couple things. I think that number one, part of the reason that white workers are not acting in mass in their interests is the strength of what Cheryl Harris called the property of whiteness. It's very powerful. And I would argue that, yes, for a lot of people, they're suffering, difficult material conditions and have seen erosions in their own life. But by and large, white folks are doing real good, okay? Real good in the United States of America. And that is going to be a difficult task. And certainly the white left and the left, broadly speaking, has a lot of work to do in organizing, which is the only way to create any kind of real and substantive, lasting liberation in this country, is to organize for a fundamental transformation of the social relations that exist under US law. Now, in terms of teachers, we absolutely need to be supporting teachers in their effort to teach the true history of the United States. Absolutely. We also need to be challenging the bureaucracy in these unions who are not standing up in the ways that they need to defend teachers, and have largely capitulated to the demands of the liberal wing of the Republic. So I think that we're going to be doing a lot of what Black people have always been doing, is organizing and struggling and learning from the past and trying to implement that knowledge in creating a more liberated future. But I mean, I'm really glad that that was brought up. Cheryl Harris's article on whiteness as property, and I do recommend. I could actually even drop it in the chat for people so they can download it, and just to get a sense of that, because the truth is that we without a fundamental transformation of social relations, how are you going to get people to sacrifice something that is very valuable to them? Whiteness is extremely valuable in our society, highly coveted. And so I think that mass organization, definitely supporting teachers and challenging unions, challenging them to be more progressive, challenging them to take on the establishment in teaching history, and going after the liberal establishment, because they're facilitating this as well. Okay, so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you guys. All right. So listen, now I'm going to go to chat. I ask that you put your questions in chat, and but I do feel like if you would like to read your own question, you can let me know that, or comment as well. So don't hold back from that opportunity. So let's see. We got a stat going here in the chat. And
I think Renla was first.
Renla?
And then, Reverend Pinkney and Steve Lee. Yeah.
Okay. Renla?
Oh, yeah, can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. I think that trying to clarify critical race theory was given a delivered a death knell when our vice president said that this is not a racist country. And I was just, I mean, I already had my misgivings about her anyway. When she said that, I was just incensed. It's like, well, if America isn't a racist country, then it also isn't a sexist country. And it's like, okay, if it's not a racist country, then how do you explain how Black people are behind in every aspect of society? How do you explain that? You know, and to me, if you say there is no racism, then it's almost like saying that Black people are inferior. You know? And I guess if it's not a racist country, then it isn't a sexist country. You know, that can be said. Well, if it's not racist, it's not sexist either. And I bet you she would argue you down. I'm meaning our vice president, Kamala Harris. She would argue you down that, yeah, America is a sexist country, but she's going to say it's not a racist country. What is you all's feelings about that?
That can go to the panelists. Either one of you guys can jump in there.
Well, I don't look to politicians for anything. You know, I firmly believe what Mark Twain said, that at best, politicians have to be changed frequently, just like diapers, for the same reason. So, you know, I think that we have to, you know, focus on building power among, you know, the masses of people, and not put much stock. I mean, you know, people who go into that are going into a structure which is designed. I mean, by its very design, it's intended to have people in those positions to take certain positions, to do certain things. And the system is not hardwired to allow for the liberation of oppressed groups. So we can't be surprised by that. So I think I don't put much stock in anything that any of them say. You know, we just have to do this for ourselves.
I agree completely with Mark and just want to quickly say that representation is not liberation.
All right, anyone else
Yeah.
want to comment on that?
I was just going to very shortly say.
Listen, before you get on, Lloyd, it would be great if you guys not write your question, but raise your hand, and we can do it that way. Instead of you writing your question, we can have you speak. If you can't raise your hand, you can write stack, the word stack in chat. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Lloyd.
I was just going to very quickly add that, yes, the United States is fundamentally a racist country. It was inscribed in the founding documents of this country. And so, I mean, anybody who argues against that is not dealing with the history that we have and the documents that we have. Any gains that Black people have made in this country, or any oppressed people outside the dominant white group, and I would add the wealthy elite among them, has had to fight tooth and nail for anything that we ever were able to ascertain had to be paid for in blood. So this country is fundamentally racist. We will have to transform it at its core for it to be anything more.
So, okay, thanks, Lloyd. Abayomi, do you see people's hands raised? 'Cause I
Yeah,
don't
Steve is next. And I don't know if Reverend Pinckney had to leave. I don't see his hand up. Is he still here?
Reverend, are you there?
Maybe he had to leave. Okay, Steve.
No, he's still there.
Oh, okay, all right. Reverend Pinckney, are you there?
Well, he may be doing something else. Let's
Yeah,
move
we'll
on.
come back to him. Okay, Steve, go ahead.
First of all, thanks to everybody. This has been a fantastic series of talks, and it's really, really vital and important. I'm really glad to be able to hear this. Just a couple of things real quick. There is a teach truth movement among teachers, teach the truth. And it's going on all over the country. It includes obviously a lot of Black teachers, but other teachers as well. And that's something that we definitely need to support. And it's a real battle because some of these teachers are being fired for violating these anti-CRT, these restrictions on teaching CRT. But I also wanted to throw in just a little more optimism in the sense that it's not, Black people are hurt the worst by racism, obviously, but other people are hurt as well. So studies have been done that when the racial gap of wages between whites and Blacks is greater, the overall gap between workers and bosses is also greater. So white people are hurt, white workers are hurt by racism secondarily. Obviously, Black workers are hurt most, but white workers are also hurt as well. And racism upholds a system that keeps the system going, a system which is hurtling us all towards destruction through climate change, possible nuclear war we see in Ukraine, these kind of things. So racism doesn't help anybody, fundamentally, and we can build a movement around fighting against racism that crosses, racial lines, as we saw with the George Floyd movement a year and a half ago. So anyway, it's great. We need to do it, but there's a real possibility to do it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Steve. What part of the country are you in?
Seattle.
Oh, okay. Welcome.
Okay.
Welcome.
So we have a question from Marguerite. Many of you may not know her, but she's one of our differently able people, and she has written a question. I would like to read that. Are you there, Marguerite, still? Well, her question is, what can we do to educate? Oh, you're welcome, Marguerite, anytime. What can we do to educate our parents and grandparents to speak up and out? That's for you guys. What do we tell our old people? No, I'm just our elderly.
That would be you, Derek.
Yeah.
Would anybody like to go with that? Try to answer that for Marguerite? Well, I think there's many ways. And what? Did somebody just say something?
No, I was going to say that, the process of education cuts across age. And, I think that the same messages that we bring to the youth, we bring to the elders. We continue to all be part of the same family, the same community with the same interests, essentially. And we all need to be on the same page with the same message, doing the same thing at the same time. And, for most people, I'm finding this out as I get older. I'm old now, but I still look at the world. I still perceive things, in much the same way that I did when I was 19. It's just that now I've got more knowledge, experience, and wisdom. So age doesn't so much matter. I think, as it does just our organizing and educating all members of our community and recognizing that we're all comrades and we've all got something to contribute in one way or another.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Mark. Okay, I would like to pose to, before I go to you, Linda, Abayomi, is there a question that you would like to pose to our panelists or in the discussion, or should I go into?
Yeah,
Linda?
we can go to Linda. She's had her hand up.
Okay, Linda Rayburn.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, y'all. How you doing?
Great.
A little late, but it's nice to see everyone. So I'm teaching high school English right now. And yeah, it's been very interesting. So the youth, they know what's up. They know shit's bad. You know, I think when it comes to Black History Month, you know, they tired of hearing just about slavery and they're ready to make change. So I applaud them. I'm a part of that youth still. But I think what I notice with teachers is they're swamped, they're overwhelmed. You know, we're dealing with so much and we're underpaid, you know, and it's just, again, where does the weight go to? You know, by the end of the day, we're tired and we have our own lives, our own children. So you definitely see how the system continues to have this cycle happen. I think where I'm noticing what's disheartening is when I hear about other teachers trying their best to teach about history, they're not correlating to the times now. And I think that's how you see the youth getting lost in it or getting demoralized or don't see their place, their power. So I've been practicing that, bringing that, but I have the space to do that where I'm at. And, you know, like, again, most teachers don't have that space. You know, they have to follow a lot of guidelines and, you know, a lot of testing. You know, it's ridiculous. It's frustrating. So I wanted to share that. Another thing is the Zen project. I heard someone speak on that. The teacher at my school in history, he's teaching Howard Zen, a people's history, and I applaud him. So that we kind of work together to correlate different things with the students and talk about history and things that they haven't heard about, you know, really digging into the workers' movement, labor strikes, Black Panther, you know, but being able to let these students know their power because they have it and trying any way, you know, to let them know that, you know, the change is going to come from them. And I think that's hard when sometimes they're learning so much about history and they can't connect the dots. And I see students get demoralized and they'll come to my class, say, oh, I just learned this and all these facts. And it's time that we organize in a way that the youth and especially workers come more so realize how much more we have in common. So I just wanted to share that right now while I'm in bed.
Can I suggest in response to that, you know, imagine if the teachers realize that they don't have to bear the full weight. You know, the students themselves are hungry for an opportunity to make a contribution. They want to be part of a movement. If they understand that this critical race theory thing is an opportunity for them to have their own movement, that can prompt a lot of excitement. Rather than relying on the teachers to bring them the history, if they organize among themselves to teach themselves, you know, to find materials themselves, to organize study groups, you know, that becomes an act of resistance, one that's very powerful, because in spite of what the state tells them about what they can or will learn, they are going to learn what they want to learn, and they're going to teach their friends and their relatives and others the things that they're finding out for themselves. And they're fully capable of it. I can't forget, you know, some years ago when I spoke to Detroit public school students, you know, about history and some other things, and several of them came up afterwards And they said, well, what you shared was interesting, but have you read? And they proceeded to give me this list of books that they were studying. And I said, I'm scared of you, you know? So they're able to do this.
Great. All right, next, that would be Leona.
Peaceful greetings, everyone.
Peace.
Listen, I had a question. Not too long ago, I read this article called Critical Race Theory and the Jewish Project. It was in August 2021. It was written by a guy named Gilad Atzmon. Now, I want to ask a question, but I got to give you a little background right quick. Now, in his article, he says, and I quote, last month, Jewish historian Henry Abramson used the Jewish Telegraphic Agency platform to inform us that, quote, anyone teaching the past by skipping over the unpleasant parts isn't teaching history. They are engaged in propaganda. And then, end quote. And then he goes on to say, this firm statement took me by surprise. Like Abramson, I oppose all forms of memory laws that restrict the free historical discussion. Yet, Jewish institutions are invested heavily in policing the historical debate. They often castigate as Holocaust deniers everyone who dares to question the primacy of Jewish suffering or even offer a slightly unorthodox vision of World War II. Now, with that little background, earlier in the conversation tonight, I heard people make references to the right is doing this or the right is doing that. I'm not sure how the right is being defined, but I'm wondering, is it bigger than the right, whatever that is? And I'll go back on mute. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to take a stab at that one, if folks don't mind. Yes, it certainly is bigger than the right. We're talking about the entire, really the US empire, because this is what this is really about. And so I made mention about challenging the liberal establishment as well, because they're implicated in upholding these structures that are adversely affecting oppressed people as well. They just put a different face on it. And so that's something that we have to be aware of, and that we have to address. Is because, the Democrats will tell you, well, just elect us and, everything will be great. And as Mr. Fancher and Ian told us, like politicians are, don't rely on them for any measure of liberation. And so, yes, we're talking about addressing the hegemony of capitalism, really, when it comes down to it, because that's what racism has been upholding as well, is for rampant materialism, accumulation, and that's all guided by a racialized hierarchy. So I think that, yeah, it cannot just stop. This is not about challenging Republicans or simply about challenging Republicans in state legislatures that are putting forth these bills trying to limit what teachers can teach in their classrooms. It's a whole lot more than that. It's about challenging an entire system, which has many actors implicated within it. So I would just say that.
And I would like to just briefly add on top of that, now everyone is well aware of, Martin Luther King's quote in regards to the white moderate. So when I'm talking about the crazy nut right wing, that's the vehicle at which all of this is moving through, kind of as the conductor. But a lot of people are on board this train, right? And so, even folks who were marching in the streets in summer of 2020, when it was the thing to do. It was cool to be all about, we support Black lives. But then when it really came down to it, we saw a lot of our liberal friends, a lot of our white allies, a lot of folks who wanted to get back to their regularly scheduled lives, right? But as Black people, we do not have that luxury, that privilege, that ability to say, you know what, I'm tired of protesting. I just want to go, chill out and not think about race. The country we live in is racist. We cannot not think about it because my skin color has been weaponized against me when I leave the house. And so, yes, when we say right wing, those may be the crazy outspoken ones, but we know that when we're fighting for liberation, we have to get to everyone, including the moderates, including the folks who think they're liberal. But when it really comes down to putting their life on the line or putting something at stake, especially again, we saw that after the summer of 2020, folks got tired. They weren't in this fight for the long haul. But those of us who are fighting for Black liberation, we know that it is not a one match game. This is a long battle.
Cool. Okay, listen, we're going to keep moving because there's questions galore, or they're coming. Thank you for that, Nancy. And all you guys, really, this is great. Isn't this a great discussion? Damn right, I know it. All right, Tova, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here and really appreciate all of you that are sticking around for this discussion. I'm a former Detroiter, went to Detroit public schools, and so did both my daughters, but I'm now living in New Jersey. And I wanted to raise a related issue with regards to what's going on in another thing that's going on in school boards and schools across the country where Palestinian teachers and school board members have been under attack for just talking about Palestine in any way, shape, or form. And as a matter of fact, I am going to a school board meeting tomorrow in a small town in Jersey because a school board member is under attack by some Zionist forces for having retweeted something on her personal Twitter account that used the quote "from the river to the sea," and she's being accused of being anti-Semitic and hating Jews and whatever because of that. So, and by the way, I'm Jewish. We're going to go and defend this school board member at the board meeting tomorrow, but there's also a teacher in another town that's under attack for having said something about history and Palestine and et cetera. So there's a very similar thing going on nationwide. Last year, I spoke at a different school board meeting when 2 Palestinian school board members were under attack by Zionists. So it's a very similar movement where they're trying to say that you can't say anything about Palestine and anti the state of Israel because it makes Jewish people uncomfortable. Well, I'm Jewish, it doesn't make me uncomfortable at all. It makes Jewish people uncomfortable if they support the repression that's going on and the genocide that's going on and the apartheid that's going on in Israel. So anyway, I just wanted to raise the issue that, the same tactic, these Zionists are attacking from the right wing, just like the racist minority of people who are attacking against critical race theory. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Just to comment on that, I think, it's really important to note that a lot of the censorship around that is because the US and Israel are very similar. They are both colonizers. They are both capitalists. They're both imperialists. The US and Israel are in arms deals together. And, the US doesn't want to be recognized for that. But that's why they start coming up with that divisive sort of language around that, saying that it's excuse me, that it makes Jewish people uncomfortable. And I just want to point out that a big piece of that is just because Israel and the US work together. It just goes to show that the enemy is capitalism and imperialism.
Cool. All right.
And also that the enemy is global in its focus, and they keep encouraging us to be exclusively local. Anything that we do locally has international implications, and we need to be conscious of that so that we can be more effective, both locally and internationally.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's important, Mark, because Malcolm X, who we're honoring tonight, had an impact internationally, not only in the United States, but also in Africa and West Asia or the Middle East. And his work, for example, with the Organization of African Unity in 1964, where a resolution was actually passed defending the human rights of African people in the United States, was even used in 2020 before the United Nations Human Rights Council, where the government of Botswana utilized that resolution to convene a hearing after the brutal police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So yes, this is a worldwide struggle over resources and over a political direction.
Okay.
Clara, I think it's next.
Yes.
And Karen, yeah.
On you, Clara.
Hello. Hello,
Hi.
everybody. First, I'd like to thank everybody for having this panel. I'm extremely excited to be involved in anything, any discussion on this particular day, recognizing Malcolm X. I'd also just like to address the question or something someone said about older people, grandparents or whatever. I believe there was a question or something said about how to teach grandparents or what grandparents can do. And I would say that one of the things that I'm interested in and that I try to do all the time is to be involved in intergenerational conversations and groups. Because as so many people explained to us on the panel tonight, is that the CRT, critical race theory, is a framework to connect the dots about what's going on and what is happening to us. So for me, as a super senior, I call myself, a person who's 74, soon to be 75, I feel like it is my honor to be on the face of the earth, and that I'm not here, that I am here for a reason. And that is to pass on my knowledge and to be engaged with people of all ages, and especially young people. And in order to do this, we have to be interested in some of the things that they're interested in order for them to be able to come to us and want to engage in the things that we want to share with them. So I would suggest that we get involved in intergenerational focus groups. That's what I would like to contribute to the conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Any response from the panelists, or do we move on?
I agree with that. As a young person myself, I had no idea how important those intergenerational relationships were until I got involved with protesting in 2020. I feel like because of those relationships, I have been able to grow and learn so much, but also to offer my own perspective to help others learn and grow along with me. So I completely agree that that is a good step in starting those conversations.
Cool. Thanks, Sammy, for that. Let me check the chat real quick to see if I'm missing some questions.
Well, we have Karen.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Hi, everyone. I'm here in New York City, and I am totally agreeing with Clara, who spoke, because that actually was something that I thought was really important. Because right now, CRTs, the burden is being put on the teachers in many ways, and I think it's really important to have a family involved in passing on history and information. And if they're not up to speed with that they should, try to get that into their children's history. So I'm totally in agreement with that. Having focus groups is a great idea. The one thing that I have been grappling with was in Charlottesville, people were protesting with Jews will not replace us, right? And there was someone later on in an article that expressed the feeling or pointed out that Jews during the Holocaust were considered beneath a race. They were not human, period, and that they deserve to be exterminated. And so I'm trying to reconcile race and that idea that a religious belief, or at least a Semite, is not human, how that all is being passed down. Because it's kind of put in this melting pot of not only the people racist against Blacks, they're also against people like me, Asian. There's a lot of attacks going on because of that. And there's a lot of people who are attacking Hispanics because they're from Mexico. So we are all in this big mosh of being victimized by people who have very sick ideas. So I'm trying to reconcile it, because for me, Jewish people are white. And yet they are also being targeted because of their religious beliefs. So it's something that I'm trying to understand how that has come to be, and how that sort of also separates us, because we can't put all white people in that same category, because they are just as victimized as well. The Irish were victimized when they came to this country because they were the low man in the totem pole for years. So how do we bring ourselves together to fight this if we do not make those very subtle distinctions that are historically accurate and have been passed on, but there's a big blanket statement over it? And I think there needs to be more nuance of what it is we're talking about. Because we talk about a critical race theory, and you're just thinking black and white. But there are many, many different shades. And even, someone who's Jewish, who is also white, gets very confusing. Does that make any sense to anyone?
Yes, I'd like to respond. We have to keep in mind that race is purely a social construct. It's an artificial concept. Human beings are human beings. They differ only marginally genetically, and scientists have proved that time and time again. But what many people also don't know is that white supremacy, as we have come to know it in modern times, is not something that is inherent to human existence. It did not always exist. We know exactly when it started. Okay, it started in the late 1400s when certain idiots decided that they were going to begin enslaving people and trying to conquer other people's territories. And in order to rationalize and justify that, they came up with these ideas about certain peoples being inferior. If you look in ancient times, race was as insignificant as the color of people's eyes and the color of people's hair. It would have struck people in ancient times as bizarre for you to take special note of people's skin color. And if you don't believe it, just look at the writings that came out during ancient times when Greeks looked with great reverence on Africa and Africans because of the genius that existed there. You look at the Bible and you see that notwithstanding the great diversity of the populations that are present in it, that race is hardly mentioned at all. So it became necessary to create these artificial concepts of people being divided based on skin color. And in doing that, especially in the United States, there was special attention paid to two populations, the African population and the indigenous populations, because these were two populations that were completely forced into US reality. They wanted no part of it and they were forced, and because they were forced, they fought back and they rebelled every opportunity that they had. So there had to be special attention paid to them. If you look at Nazi Germany, you're correct. In terms of the physical characteristics and other things, Jews, in that population of Jews may have looked white, but Hitler needed an other. And so it was necessary to create an entire body of information that somehow characterized them as being something less than human. So we just have to keep that in mind, and that's what that's all about. And usually there's an economic imperative which drives all of this. It is to somebody's strategic advantage, an economic advantage to keep people divided based along racial lines. And as long as we're aware of that, then we're in a position to defeat them.
I guess what I'm wondering is, can it be changed to not critical race theory, but critical human theory? Because
it cannot, for this reason, because it was designed specifically to address a reality that was created by oppressing forces. And so it is not just human, it was the oppression was specifically oriented toward race, specifically, and more specifically toward people of African descent. So in order to fight it, you have to identify what the problem is. And the problem is that much of this oppression is oriented specifically at African people. If you look at the structure of US law, and the fact that that was the racial reality at the time that the country was established. There were white people, there were Black people, and there were First Nations people. A lot of the other people who came later as immigrants, they weren't part of that. And so baked into the very fabric of the United States of America is a deliberate attempt to suppress and kill First Nations people and to enslave and to kill African people. So if we're going to deal with that, we've got to be very clear about what we're talking about.
Okay, but just to counter that, incarceration of the Japanese Americans, the limit of quotations for Asians to come into this country, specifically Chinese or Japanese. So to that point, I understand that, but those are also part of that racial disparity that you're talking about. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that is something that I know. It's
an important point, and I want to respond to it because the oppression, the repression, and the racialized targeting of other groups is real. Not denying that. What happened to Asians during World War II is reprehensible. It's horrible. But in terms of the way that the country was constructed, the way that the body of law was constructed, historically, it was not contemplating that. And so what critical race theory does is it looks at the structure as it exists. It was augmented, it was supplemented, it was used strategically in order to persecute, to confine Asians, during that period. It was designed, it was modified in order to persecute even certain European immigrants. But that's not part of that structure, which critical race theory is focused on. There are different strategies that have to be used to get at the discrimination that's encountered by other groups.
Thank you.
I would just add that CRT does not exclude other people of color. I would just put that out there. And I think to a degree, Mr. Fancher kind of covered that. And certainly different groups have been racialized through various points throughout US history to uphold white supremacy. You mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act. We talked about the internment of Japanese Americans. The United States will racialize those whom it needs to uphold this project. In terms of Jewish, the Jewish people, because you started off with the Jewish people, who have certainly been persecuted throughout history and had a very dark history of persecution in Europe in this time in the early 20th century. However, the Jewish American experience is different than the European experience. And it's not to say that they weren't persecuted here. It's just that if you look at the history, which I've been doing recently, is that Jewish Americans, while they definitely had to navigate their Jewish identity in relation to the white power structure, they were also granted whiteness very early on. Now that became precarious in the late 19th century, but they did have access to that, and that largely shielded them from a lot of the discrimination that we're talking about in terms of CRT. And so that's just a point that I just want to add in there. But CRT is not exclusionary. Like it's not excluding other people of color. It's just talking about the Black-white divide that was codified in US law. And so I think Mr. Fancher explained that a little better, but I just wanted to add a couple of those points. Is that yes, this is a project of white supremacist capitalist accumulation, and at various times. So when, as I'm sure you know, they racialized Asian Americans in this time in a way to exclude them, and then also did that to, as you mentioned, Latinx people, when that became necessary. And all of that, as Mr. Fancher described, had economic imperatives behind it. But CRT is not exclusionary. It's not placing other people of color outside of this framework. I don't think that's what CRT is doing. I mean, at least no scholarship on CRT that I've read is doing that, where it's like, this is simply about Black and white people. It's about the whole spectrum of racialization in this country.
Thank you for that. And I guess the reason I sort of am bringing that up is because one of the other ways to gain power is, of course, to bring all those forces together. So knowing that it does not exclude other races, we are talking about African Americans, we are talking about Latinx, we're talking about Asians, and any indigenous people. That's where I think the energy needs to go, and it's got to be across all of those lines, not just in the educational system, but in all of those organizations. I only heard about this event from Day of Remembrance, which was the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. That's why I'm here, because I wanted to know what's going on here and how does it affect other people, other races, because I believe that that's where we all need to go. And I love all the ideas and everything that you guys have said. I don't mean to be critical of anything. I just was like, these are questions that are in my soul, in my individual person. And I just, wanted to share that. So thank you. I don't want to babble anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I'm glad you were informed about this webinar through that organization. Shows that we are reaching out on a broad level. And we have about 8 minutes. We want to end by 9. And I wanted to give opportunity to all the panelists to briefly summarize or make a concluding remarks for the program this evening. So Sammy, you want to start since you were the first one?
No pressure if you want.
Let me gather my thoughts. I think that, what's important to take out of this is that CRT is an academic framework that is not necessarily any sort of training, but it is a tool to help educate and analyze history and how things are now. It focuses on systemic and structural racism, and it recognizes the way that race and racism are woven into our institutions. It's important to understand the power that the people have as parents, as teachers, as students, and other people who can just be supporters to stop these bans and censorship and policies against this analysis and concept. I think that CRT is providing educators with a new lens for examining their teaching. I think that if it is incorporated more to schools, it will raise the students' awareness on how policy shapes life and outcomes for people of different races. So I do think that that is something that's really important, as students now are incredibly woke, like they want to get involved. So I think that using CRT is encouraging them, and it's encouraging their educators to critique history and the narratives around how we have always been taught in this whitewashed way. It increases awareness of intersecting identities and the impact of one's power and privilege in society. So those are my final thoughts on that.
Thank you. Lloyd?
Yeah, I would just say this has been an excellent discussion. I appreciate sharing this panel and this dialogue with the participants. Critical race theory is an important analytical tool, as our lawyers shared with us. And so I hope that folks gained something from the conversation here, and they'll also be moved to do their own research, but also, as I said in the beginning, be committed to organizing for a better world, because that's actually where it starts. If we really want to challenge the power structure, is organizing within our communities against a world that negates the true nature of history in this country and globally, really. A country that is not invested in caring for its people, most particularly its most marginalized, most particularly the Black folks that were brought here against their will, and the Native people for whom were dispossessed of their land. And so thank you all very much, and I look forward to sharing space with you in the future.
Nancy.
Thank you. And I will be brief this time when I say I will be brief. We've covered a lot. Just want to say thank you to my fellow panelists and for everyone's captive attention. This has been very great, and I hope folks walk away with a lot of information. I would just like to offer at this point that I come from a true African tradition where we believe that it truly takes a village to raise a child. And so in this discourse, we're talking about education and trying to teach our kids. And I want to implore everyone that it should not just be the function of the schools. And so when we're thinking about what can we do, think about, are there neighborhood programs? If you may not have any young people in your lives, take stake in the young people's lives who surround you in your community. We shouldn't just rely on the institution of the school as the sole and final place that our children learn. And I just also want to raise up the intergenerational work. I mean, we learn so much from our elders, They were in this fight. And again, history repeats itself. And so it's imperative that we have these dialogues, that we engage with each other, because we don't want to lose the jewels, the information, you know, the tactics, everything that our elders have gone through. We want to take that in and use it so that we can really truly fight this battle against racism and for Black liberation. And I'll just end by saying, I always intentionally say that I'm fighting for liberation of Black people. And when I say that, when Malcolm X says it, when anyone you hear say these words, we are not being exclusionary to the detriment of any other group. It is just the mere fact that Black folks remain at the bottom rung. Therefore, if you support and you fight for the liberation of Black people, of Black women, of Black girls, of Black trans people, everyone will be free. And that's what I want to leave folks with today. Good brother Mark was trying to hammer home that critical race theory is a framework that's meant to look through the lens of this racist system where Black people were brought here in bondage and never given our true citizenship. That's why we're looking at Black-white, because that's what the framework was founded on. But take solace in knowing that when Black people are free, everyone will be free.
Thank you. And Mark.
Yes, I just want to say that, you know, sometimes when we examine these issues, you know, it seems like such a daunting challenge. It seems almost demoralizing, especially when we reflect on the suffering that so many people have to endure. I'm a man of faith, and I always have great confidence that we're going to win this. You know, the Lord has told us that we will. It's just a question of what role we will play. And the understanding that there are forces of good and forces of evil in this world mean that there will be conflict and that there will be people who suffer because of that conflict. But there is redemptive suffering. And out of conflict and suffering emerge good things. And only good things are going to emerge from the struggle that we're all engaged in. So we should never give up and take heart that victory is certain.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank once again all the panelists and the way more than 100 people that attended this portion of the webinar. And we also streamed on YouTube. And the link to the YouTube video file is in the chat. And we will, of course, circulate this webinar widely over social media. And we want to encourage all the panelists and all the audience to do so as well. The Moratorium Now Coalition and the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice meets every Monday at 7 o'clock using this format. Anyone listening is welcome to attend our meetings. We have a myriad of issues that we're dealing with, from police community relations to the crisis of housing in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. Also, in terms of foreign policy, we're very much concerned about the threat of large-scale military conflict in Eastern Europe and what impact that will have on oppressed and working people here in the United States. Once again, thank you. I want to turn it over to Derek to conclude the program.
Well, I have nothing else to say, Abiyami. You did good, man. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Later,
you.
y'all.
Thank everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank our moderators as well as the audience.
Yes. Thank everyone.
Solidarity.
Solidarity.
Yeah. Please, this was amazing.
Excellent.